Thanks for coming out in person. We were just saying maybe we should allude to the presence of hundreds of people so that the folks online think that this is like a packed event. I think that would be good.
Well, welcome everyone to the second in our series of Cathedral Chats. Delighted to be offering the conversation this evening in a hybrid format. Wonderful to have you here in person, and I know that there are other folk this evening who are watching us online. It's an opportunity for us to engage in important conversations around topical and relevant issues with thought leaders in those areas. So we're really grateful to be dipping our toe in the water this evening on conspiracy theories with Dr. Maxwell Kennel. Deacon Rob, you're going to be introducing Max shortly, so I'll leave that to you. Just a reminder, for those who haven't caught up, we're going to be gathering in Bishopsgate, which is the forecourt just outside the cathedral, on Friday at 6 o'clock around our fire pit to sing some carols. And you're more than welcome to drop in for some mulled cider and a few carols if you're in the neighbourhood. And on Sunday, we have made the decision to keep our doors open after our 10:30 service from noon through until 4 o'clock. Deacon Rob and Rob Miller are offering a Christian conversations group around some of the readings that we look at during the week here. And then we have time after that to enjoy some art or time to meditate, time to pray, time to read, just time to be in our space. And that time concludes with some music and then a short service of worship. Again, no charge for that. Love to have you join us if you're in the neighbourhood. So Deacon Rob, I'm sure, like me, folk are itching to meet Dr. Kennel, so I'm going to invite you now to introduce him.
Well, many of the people in this room will know Dr. Kennel, or Max, already, but for those of you who are joining from the online audience, or for those of you who didn't go to grad school with the two of us at McMaster, Max, Dr. Kennel, is currently a Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council postdoctoral fellow in the Department for the Study of Religion at the University of Toronto. And I'll just add that the Shirk postdoc is an incredibly competitive and prestigious postdoc, which only speaks to the caliber of Max's research. The project that he's working on at U of T is called Critique of Conspiracism, and it's being supervised by Dr. Pamela Clausen. Max completed his PhD in McMaster University's Department of Religious Studies, where he's also taught courses on religion and violence and approaches to the study of religion. Max and I were actually colleagues, as I've alluded to, in Mac's Religious Studies department, and we both had the distinction of defending our theses over Zoom and having the internet cut out on us in the middle of one of the biggest moments of our professional life, so we have that in common. His dissertation is called Ontologies of Violence, which just sounds like a really fascinating project. He uses violence as a diagnostic concept to interpret Jacques Derrida's Violence and Metaphysics, Mennonite pacifist epistemologies, and Grace Janssen's Trilogy. And it's currently under review for publication with Brill. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So Max has published a number of articles in peer-reviewed academic journals. He was the guest editor for a special edition of the journal Political Theology, and his book Post-Secular History, Political Theology and the Politics of Time was actually just published this month with Palgrave Macmillan. So hearty congratulations, Max, on the new book. But what's really important is that Max and his partner Amy are just incredibly kind, generous, and thoughtful people, and they're both dear friends to me and my partner Kyle. Max isn't just smart and perceptive, he isn't just a rigorous scholar, and he has all those things, but he has a big heart, and he's one of my dear friends. So it's just a big honor. We're very grateful that you've taken some time to chat with us tonight. So welcome, Max, on behalf of the whole Cathedral community.
Well, thanks, Rob. I didn't know flattery would be such a part of this, so.
Couldn't let you off too easy.
No.
So I promise that is the most I'm going to speak tonight. We're going to give Max the floor in a second. But I just want to say a few things about format, and it's pretty simple. Max and I are going to have a bit of a back and forth here, a bit of a conversation. We've worked through some questions, which I think will really shed some light on this topic. But then we're going to have time for Q&A at the end. If you're watching online, feel free to post questions in the chat. Eduardo, our tech support, will text me those questions, and I'll make sure that they get asked in the Q&A section. And if you're here in the audience, we'll just pass a mic around if you have a question. So thank you all for being here with us, whether you're here in person or virtually. So to kick off the conversation, Max, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your research. I'm particularly interested in the big picture, and then we'll narrow in a bit. So where do you situate yourself within the discipline of religious studies? I see the phrase political theology coming up a lot in your bio, so maybe you'll kind of start there and talk to us a little bit about how you approach your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. That was very kind, and I'm excited to talk with you all tonight about conspiracy theories and religion, which is not a research topic that I started with. I began my kind of scholarly career in philosophy and English literature at the University of Waterloo, and then I took a detour into Christian theology at Conrad Grebel College. But I feel like I found my true home at the McMaster Religious Studies department. It's an amazing place, and we have some students here in person from the department tonight, and so it's great to be in good company there. I situate myself as a scholar of religion within this discipline of religious studies, which I love because it's interdisciplinary. So there's people within religious studies departments that do all sorts of things. And so I work in a small subfield of religious studies called political theology, which when you first hear it might sound like it's a theological use of political ideas. But it's quite a bit more broad than that. Political theology becomes interesting to me when it looks at concepts that might look on the surface to be secular, to have no religious content. But what I love about political theology is it gives one tools to find the theological influences and resonances and structures that might lie behind what we otherwise think is secular. Some political theologians have a bit of a kind of a victorious narrative with that. They like to say that, oh, what you really thought was secular, it was really, theological the whole time. But I'm not so interested in that kind of way of doing political theology. I try to do it as in the most open ways that I can. And to do that, I look at critical theory, which comes from the Frankfurt School, which is very broadly put a kind of a critical theory of society, which I'm excited to bring to bear on this problem of conspiracy theories, conspiratorial thinking.
And you do some teaching.
I do,
right?
yeah,
So I know that you teach at McMaster in our department. So what are some of the courses you teach? What are some of the things you're really excited to kind of bring up in the context of your courses?
When I began in the PhD program in religious studies at McMaster, in my second year, I had the opportunity to be a teaching assistant for a very exciting course there, which still runs. It's called Cults, Conspiracies, and Close Encounters. So it's about cults and new religious movements, conspiracy theories, and alien abduction narratives. And so this course blew my mind. I was coming from a theological context. I didn't see this as an area of study. But after TAing for the course for a little while, my interest started to build. And then just toward the end of my PhD, I thought, oh, there's a real research project in this. But yeah, I've taught other courses at McMaster on religion and violence, which, as Rob said, is the topic of my dissertation. And right now, I'm just finishing teaching a course at the University of Waterloo on the topic of tonight's talk, which is conspiracy theories and religion. So I am lucky to be working with 25 really sharp undergraduate students at U Waterloo who are right now submitting essays that compare QAnon and COVID conspiracy theories. And it's very exciting stuff, and I think that students who are a bit younger than me have an even clearer view of it.
Yeah, that's great. And so we're gonna get into a more precise definition of conspiracy thinking or conspiracism in a second. But can you just say briefly a little bit about your postdoc project? Kind of what brought you to the study of conspiracy thinking? What motivated you to kind of really delve into that project for this stage of your research?
Yeah, so there's kind of two routes to that. There's one motivation that came from a kind of an academic direction. I want to know about what the structure of thinking is that's behind conspiratorial thinking. So I don't want to get lost in specifics necessarily. I want to know kind of what the overall pattern is that one could identify across different conspiracy theories and the ways of thinking they promote. So this project, I'm trying to use this postdoctoral project to bring in some work from my dissertation. So this means I'm very interested in a question, do conspiracy theories lead toward violence? And if so, how? Or how might that be different? And then the second question that I have comes from the book that I've recently published. It's a series of essays, and it just came out this past week. It's called Post-Secular History. And it's a bit technical. It's a kind of a high-flying, academic text, but it does deal with something that we all experience, and that is the periodization of time. So in the book, I'm really curious about how religious ideas influence how everyday people divide up their lives into a past, present, and future, or how we might divide up intellectual history into ancient, medieval, and modern. I think these divisions, are very meaningful, especially in the context of conspiracy theories. I think I'm just starting to think about it, but I believe there are ways that conspiracy theories they might distort our sense of time. And so we'll return to that later in some of the definitions. But
yeah, and one of the things that religious studies does as a discipline, and one of the things that your work does, is takes these concepts that are that people assume are value neutral, like you just mentioned the division of time just as an example. So to say ancient, medieval, modern, there's a sense in which these are just kind of straightforward concepts that we use in our everyday speech, but these are kind of laden with significance, and I think part of what your work does is to excavate some of that significance.
Rob, I think that's the core of what I find so helpful about religious studies and about political theology. And so across the three projects that I have, the book and my dissertation and this postdoctoral project, in each of them what I'm trying to say basically is that there are ideas and concepts that we're all using that we think are neutral, that are just natural and normal and neutral, and we don't need to worry about them. what I love about religious studies and its interdisciplinary approach is that there are so many ways to find out that that's not true, that the concepts that we use are normatively loaded, which means they don't just say what is the case out in the world. They're influencing what you think ought to be the case. So for violence, for example, in my dissertation, I don't think that there is a value-neutral concept of violence. We don't always know what we mean when we say the word. Any time we call something violent, we're implicitly saying that it should not be the case, that it should not occur. And that's not just a description, because we all think differently about what, not only what is the case in the world, but what should be.
And there are debates over what counts as violence. So
and I think
violence. So
and I think that violence, how people use the term violence, will tell you a great deal about what they think, how the world ought to be. And same with time. In the book project, it's all about how past, present, and future are not stable categories. There is much of the past that returns in the present. For example, in trauma, or the future, right? The future is something that we often invoke, but we can't know it. We can't properly predict it, despite our best efforts. And so I'm most interested in these debates about, same with conspiracy theories. Mm-hmm. It's very easy to label someone a conspiracy theorist, but I'm much more interested in what our tendency to use that label means about us.
Mm-hmm. So maybe this is a good place then to kind of dive into our topic for tonight, because I think that really does a good job of helping us kind of set the table, get a sense of how you approach your research. Yeah. And so I'll just kind of ask
Before we move on, I do want to say, and your introduction sparked this too, I did want to tie in the biographical piece. Yeah, because I think a lot of scholars, I don't know how many scholars people talk to, but often scholarly activity can float up here and seem all very abstract. Mm-hmm. And I think scholars lie to themselves when they say that these ideas are just ideas. They always come from somewhere personal. They come from the heart. They come from human relationships. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't say that this conspiracy theory project came from an experience that I believe many people have, which is of a friend or a family member or a loved one or someone close to us who I had relatives and acquaintances whose judgment I respected a great deal, but who fairly quickly jumped on various bandwagons, various conspiracy theories, whether that was related to Donald Trump or COVID. And so that's a huge motivating factor behind this project. And I hope that that the compassion with which this subject, I think, requires, I hope that comes through in this conversation. I
appreciate that honesty. I think there are many scholars who pretend as though they're not bringing their personal biographies to their work, and I think it's important to be able to acknowledge that. So I appreciate
and that's something that the department at McMaster teaches so well, is that the real trick, and I think this is a Jonathan Z. Smith line, is that we need to become relentlessly self-conscious and aware of what biases and normative ideas that we're bringing to our object of study. Yeah, we don't have the God's eye view. We're always entangled, and so
that's great.
How do we do that?
That's great. So we've been dancing around the topic for the night, so let's just get to the point. And I'll ask you the $10,000 question, which is, what is conspiracism? What is conspiracy thinking? What is a conspiracy theory?
I'll answer it for that money, and I'll accept a check.
You can phone a friend if you like.
No, I don't need it. So it's hard because definitions can be so deceiving that you can have a definition of a conspiracy theory, and there will be events and phenomena that don't fit that definition.
And scholars love to debate terms and definitions,
they do,
right?
I know, but we should get straight to it. And so the best working definition that I found is from a book that was recommended to me as part of that course at McMaster. It's by Michael Barkun. It's called A Culture of Conspiracy. This is a book that a religious studies scholar wrote years before conspiracy theories became a real hot-button topic. And so in that book, Barkun sets out a three-part definition that scholars that they continue to use and that I want to work with. And so there's kind of three statements that Barkun makes that he thinks define conspiratorial thinking.
And the first is that nothing happens by accident. There are no accidents. That's number one. Number two is nothing is as it seems. And then the third one is everything is connected. So these three kind of entangled definitional points, to me, they do a pretty good job of encapsulating what a conspiracy theory is and does. A conspiracy theorist is inclined to see things that happen as part of an ordered and intentional world. For the conspiracy theorist, I think it's very difficult for conspiracy theories to admit that there are accidents, that things happen without a clear intentional cause. And same with this phrase, nothing is as it seems. I think that conspiracy theorists are almost inherently mistrustful of appearances. The question is always, what's going on behind the scenes? It's not always a bad question, but I believe the conspiracy theories take it to an extreme. And then the third one is, everything is connected. And I think that brings conspiratorial thinking very close to religious thinking. And I began my course this fall at Waterloo with this very confronting quotation from Barkun, a more recent one, where he says, the conspiracy theorist thinks nothing happens by accident, nothing is as it seems, everything is connected. And then he says, sometimes this causes conspiracy theories to join hands with religion. But I would put it far more strongly. I think that we shouldn't shy away from this idea that there's going to be a lot of overlap between religious and Christian senses of order and conspiracy thinking. And I hope that we can get into that more. But yeah, that's the three-part, that's the definition.
It's very helpful. So we'll get back, we'll put a kind of pin in the religion and conspiracy theory question. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that conspiracies do occur.
Yeah.
People do conspire, often in very nefarious ways. So what is the difference between a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory? How do scholars think about that dynamic?
Yeah, I noticed, so there's a timing issue. Sometimes scholars will go a very long time just talking about conspiracy theories, but they won't get to that point that, people do conspire. It happens. And so there's got to be a good metric for what the difference is between a real conspiracy and a conspiracy theory. So the best kind of approach to this that I've found is in the work of a scholar named Michael Butter. And if you're looking for one book, just one book to read on the topic, his last name is Butter, and it's spelt like I'm pronouncing it. The book is called The Nature of Conspiracy Theories. It's a great introduction. And in it, he answers this question, and basically, he cites a few other sources. He basically says that in the case of a real conspiracy, where, let's say, elements of a government or an institution, people conspire behind the scenes toward a certain end, we must admit that those things happen, but the difference is in scope and time. And I find that very persuasive, that a conspiracy theory very often will take a series of very real events and link them with an enormous cosmic order that is all conspiratorial. And that's where I think many conspiracy theories just lose the plot. In taking a series of events that are real conspiracies and then linking them with making them everything. So one answer is scope, and another is time. So scholars will, like Michael Butter, will also say that a real conspiracy has a kind of end point. It ends, wherein the conspirators kind of get what they want or they don't. Whereas a conspiracy theory, these theories tend to posit ongoing or almost endless permutations. So that's a good way to tell, right? If someone's talking about a conspiracy, then you might want to ask that question, are there a limited number of actors in this conspiracy, or are we talking about an infinite, unseen, hidden group, which is just not plausible. So yeah, that's the one answer I would have for that difference. And I think we need to be able to make that distinction.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So far, for the first part of this conversation, we've been a bit abstract. We've dealt with definitions. We've dealt with theories. So, if you've spent any time on social media these days, you are sure to have come across a conspiracy theory or two. But I'll just put the question to you, Max. What are some of the conspiracy theories that are kind of out in the culture right now?
I'm moving sticky notes because I have a little fact sheet here, which is important to get your it seems to be all about getting one's facts right. But the two examples, I'm ending this course at Waterloo right now with a few case studies. And the two that stand out most to me that I think are most relevant to people joining us are, number one is this conspiracy theory out of the United States called QAnon, which I'll talk about in a second. And then the second one are pandemic and COVID-related conspiracy theories.
So pandemic.
Yeah, that's right. And then not only pandemic conspiracy theories, but vaccine conspiracy theories on top of that. So yeah, I mean, to me, we need examples, and we need to know how this hits the ground. And the major one that I've been trying to follow is this QAnon phenomena. And we had a conversation before this started with someone who hadn't necessarily heard of it, and it's a strange and complex one. But to my knowledge, it began in October of 2017 when a user on an online message board, so not Facebook or Twitter, but a message board called 4chan, a user there claimed to be a Q-level clearance, kind of a member of the US government who had some kind of insider information. And so in what I think is perhaps even a very religious way, this person who was posting slowly meted out hints and vague information that led to quite a large following. And the basic idea behind the QAnon conspiracy theory is that there is a deep state, so a part of the US government that's kind of deeper than what one can see, and this deep state is full of Satan-worshipping pedophiles who drink the blood of children, and on and on and on. And the only person who can stop them is Donald Trump. And so this is where the QAnon conspiracy theory becomes political. There were many people in political office in the US who ascribe to it, which is deeply concerning. But QAnon is a very real and concrete example of a conspiracy theory that ended up inspiring very serious acts of violence.
There's a way in which QAnon almost becomes a catch-all conspiracy theory. So it kind of is a magnet for all sorts of different conspiracy theories to attach themselves to. So it's almost difficult to kind of talk about just what it is. I think that's kind of the history of it with Q and the Q drops, but in some ways it has attracted to it followers of all sorts of different conspiracy theories that have attached themselves to this movement.
And that's why it's so fascinating. There were people who follow QAnon beliefs who are evangelical Christians in the United States. But there are also large portions of the yoga, health, and wellness communities who gravitate towards it. And so it's difficult to sort out, to give it a definition. It evades definition in a lot of ways. There is also some question about how prevalent QAnon beliefs are. It's a difficult thing to lock onto. I've seen statistics that say about 17% of Americans would ascribe to some QAnon-related beliefs. It's very difficult to measure because it's a pastiche. It's a whole bunch of different beliefs, some of which become, extraneous and are discarded. It has some core. It has a core narrative. But yeah, it's a difficult thing to address.
Yeah. And I would guess that one of the questions that people have on their mind then is whether this is a new phenomenon. I think to the observer, there are ways in which this feels like it's new. But I, as a scholar, I'm curious if you can kind of speak to that a little bit. Kind of, are these new? Is there a history of conspiratorial thinking that goes back further than this kind of moment that we're in now?
Yeah, the question of what's new, that brings my mind back to some of the work I did in my recent book, where I'm trying to challenge this notion in some of the chapters that the word new is useful. There are things that are meaningfully new, but almost everything that we can talk about or see has a history. And it's no different with conspiracy theories. Most of the books that the scholarly books on conspiracy theories now tend to begin with a caveat that, like, we may think conspiracy theories are a new problem, and they are not. The conspiracy theories are as old as the hills. A great book to read on this is one by Katharina Thalmann, where she traces the history of conspiracy theories in the US from the 50s to the present. And her point is that it's actually only recently that conspiratorial thinking is considered illegitimate. Michael Butter begins his book too with a quotation from Winston Churchill, where he exhibits, just very straightforward conspiracy theories about the Jewish people. It's a kind of a anti-Semitic trope.
The cabal of
this cabal of Zion. Yeah. And so the answer is a hard no. The conspiracy theories are not new, although the problem of conspiratorial thinking has become newly relevant. There are new ways in which it's important to think about it now, whereas maybe it shouldn't have been a high priority 10, 15 years ago. But no.
And like all things with this era, my sense is probably that social media has a role to play in how these theories are disseminated and spread and shared, but the theories themselves probably stretch back quite long.
The conspiracy theories often use tropes and themes and motifs that are ancient, right? That show up on Facebook now, but are connected to something like blood libel or ancient forms of conspiratorial thinking. And so it's hard. I am not an expert on religion and social media or conspiracy and social media, although there are people who are doing great work on that. But that's definitely a part of the seeming rise of conspiratorial thinking.
Yeah, and so we've just alluded to the connection historically between conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish bigotry, and I can't help but notice that historical thread, but also the way that conspiracy thinking, bigotry, violence, that's a contemporary problem as well. Kyle and I, my partner, we lived just a 10-minute drive from the Tree of Life Synagogue when we lived in Pittsburgh. And this was a case where an individual motivated both by anti-Jewish bigotry but also by these conspiracy theories gunned down worshipers in a Jewish synagogue just down the street from where we lived. And so I think there is something there, right, between this connection between conspiracy thinking, bigotry, violence. So can you say a little bit about that connection?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main questions that I have in my project is, do conspiracy theories or conspiratorial thinking, does it lead toward violence? And it's hard because I have a student who's writing an assignment right now on, like, a final essay on Princess Diana related conspiracy theories. And there's an example of one that just doesn't seem to promote violence in any way. Whatever one thinks about how Princess Diana died and whether there was a conspiracy about that seems irrelevant to whether people commit acts of violence. But contrast that with something like QAnon, where you have very clear linear relationship between QAnon beliefs and the insurrection on January 6th of this year at the US Capitol. There's an example of where conspiratorial thinking promotes violence clearly. And so I've been reading the work of Amarnath Amarasingam, who teaches at Queen's University. He's got a great essay on this if people are curious about looking deeper. And he comes out on it in this way. He thinks that part of what a conspiratorial narrative does is it tends to construct an enemy. If there's not an enemy readily available, it'll make one up. And when we have enemies, the very category of an enemy allows people to justify violence in different ways. As you feel a kind of threat level rise, whether that's on a personal or a national level, it makes sense to me that conspiratorial thinking would lead to that kind of violence.
Well, there's often a scapegoating component to conspiracy thinking.
Yeah, and the name that, for my comprehensive exams, we were talking about these earlier, I got to read the work of René Girard, who talks very systematically about scapegoating, where we have our social tensions that we feel, And as the tensions rise, we look for someone or a group to blame. And then once we blame another, we feel better for a little bit, but then those tensions are going to rise again. And so there's this cyclical scapegoating effect that I think conspiratorial thinking promotes. It says, oh, you're having problems. Well, it's not you. It's this other group that's the cause or the reason. And then whatever mental backflips you need to do to get there.
Yeah, that's great. That's helpful.
Yeah, it's a difficult question because the term conspiracy theorist, it's also a troubled definition because anyone can level that as a charge against someone. You can call anyone who you want a conspiracy theorist. It's often used as this term of abuse. But until we think very clearly about the definition of such a term, I guess what I'm getting at is it's important to be clear about that definition to avoid just using it as a term of abuse. And violence is a term like that too, where some people will see acts of protest and call it violent, and others won't. And so there's also an internal metric everyone has for what they consider to be violent that I think is related to what you think conspiracy is.
Yeah. So like many people of my generation, I don't have a watch, so I'm just going to check the time on my phone. I'm not texting. So we're going to transition into what will be the final part of the conversation. And I'm going to ask another big question that I expect you to answer very clearly and concisely in a minute or less.
Don't ask a small one. The small ones aren't worth it.
But I think it's a question that many people will have on their minds if they're watching this. I wonder if you could say a bit about why you think people get taken in by conspiracies. What are some of the contributing factors that lead to people being taken in by these theories?
Maybe before I answer that, I want to qualify something and say that, like, when we're thinking about conspiracy theories or people who we know who believe them or some of them or none of them, there are two tendencies I want to avoid. And the one, on the one hand, is a kind of patronizing, the stupid conspiracy theorist, where I would think myself better than someone who believes a conspiracy theory because I'm, educated, whatever. I want to avoid that because it's patronizing, it's unhelpful, it only alienates people, it doesn't lead anywhere good. And similarly, on the opposite end, I want to avoid a kind of thinking that says, oh, we need to, become, close to and enmeshed with conspiracy theorists. We need to, they only deserve our compassion, and on and on. I want to find a middle way or another way. Maybe that's not a middle, but elsewhere, where one could look at people who believe conspiracy theories and oneself with compassion, but where one could also be critical and make a series of fine distinctions. And so, to answer your question about what would motivate someone to believe in a conspiracy theory, the one narrative that I've heard about this is that, part of what conspiracy theories do is they protect against uncertainty. So if we go back to that three-part definition, the conspiracy theorist believes nothing happens by accident, but things do happen by accident. Like sometimes things happen and there's not a clear, direct cause. And same with the second one, nothing is as it seems. And that's good advice sometimes. Sometimes there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than we know. However, the conspiracy theorist is not adequately prepared for when things are exactly what they seem to be, like appearances, where appearances can be trusted. And then for the third one, everything is connected. That third part of the definition, sometimes that's true. We're connected. We live in an ordered world. But sometimes that's not true. Sometimes, even if there are connections, we don't see them. And so your question was about what motivates people. And so there's one interpretation of conspiracy theories that says, look, people who believe them are struggling with uncertainty. And they believe conspiracy theories because they relieve that tension. Because conspiracy theories are all about how the world is ordered and knowable, and even if there are some things that we don't yet know, we can know them.
And even if the world is terrifying, it's almost more comforting to know that there is order than to have to face the chaos.
And I think people will I think we're all, myself included, inclined toward accepting a story about this ordered world, even if it's really bad, rather than one that says the world is a mysterious place. We don't know the future. We don't even fully understand the past or ourselves. You know, how far can we sit in that uncertainty, I think is a big question.
And are you satisfied with that explanation?
No, and I think any kind of satisfaction should be avoided, right? The problem is, with conspiracy theories is that they aim to satisfy and they complete. Better to feel the uncertainty through to the other side, and better to understand that we can't know everything and don't know everything. So no, I'm not satisfied, and I never will be.
True scholar. So let's come all the way back then. I'm fascinated that you are doing this work in a religious studies department and not, say, a history department or an anthropology department or even a philosophy department. So why religious studies? What's the connection for you between your research project and religious studies as a framework for thinking about it? What's the relationship between religion and conspiracy theories?
Yeah, I feel like that's the question that led me into the project, and I observed when I'm putting together the proposal for the book that I hope this project will become, I noticed that all of the scholars in it, or a large percentage, come from American studies departments overseas. Peter Knight, Michael Butter, these very high-level scholars are not in religious studies departments. They're in American studies departments because there is a uniquely American problem with conspiratorial thinking. But the reason that I'm doing this in a religious studies context is because I think when I read those three definitions, nothing happens by accident, nothing is as it seems, everything is connected, that seems religious to me. I mean, I think that a core part of most of the major world religions, and especially Christianity, is the idea that, you know, things may happen that seem accidental or random, but there is a divine plan behind it. And nothing is as it seems. Most religious people believe in a spiritual world that exists behind appearances. And similarly with this everything is connected or everything happens for a reason line. I mean, that's what the main connection is to me. And I think that religious people, Christians, you know, I think that religious people should take care not to rush past that fact. Better to look at the deep structural similarities and think, oh, like, is there something about the Christian faith that does believe in a divine conspiracy, wherein God would conspire behind the scenes through human actors or elsewhere? You know, I think that it's better to lean into those connections than avoid them. Because then the question becomes far more complicated. It's not about whether or not you're a conspiracy theorist, because most religious people do believe in certain specific conspiracies that are connected to divine order. The really important question then comes after that acknowledgement, where you would ask, like, okay, what makes the difference between a bad or damaging or unhealthy set of conspiratorial views and a set of religious beliefs that do believe, you know, that there are some appearances that can't be trusted, and there's something going on behind the scenes, but in a way that might be healthier. That seems to me to be the real distinction.
Yeah, so what are some helpful forms of religious faith and practice that can help to mitigate against this tendency towards, I mean, you talked about there is considerable overlap, particularly in the US, but here in Canada as well, between people of faith and people who are taken in by conspiracy theories. And so I'm curious if you think that there is, I hesitate to use the word antidote, but are there forms of faith that are healthier ways of thinking about questions like this? Yeah,
I mean, it's hard to think of it in terms of a problem and a solution, but I think we should try that for a bit. Like, there is a story that I hear in the popular media or in higher education, and sometimes also in churches. The story says that basically we have this problem of conspiratorial thinking. Your uncle believes a conspiracy theory and he's not getting vaccinated. and we got to see him at Christmas. What are we going to do? I think that the solution that we often think of is like, oh, we need better education and more critical thinking. And I agree with that a little bit. I think that that's true in some senses, like in the university where you can kind of intervene at that level. But that is not satisfying, or it doesn't seem to be effective either. I think that if people of faith are looking for a way to approach this problem, I think one of the best approaches is to cultivate a disposition that's connected to mystery and mysticism. So I think every major world religion has a mystical vein, a mystical kind of offshoot that kind of keeps the rest of that religious tradition in check. And I'm not a specialist on the Christian mystics, but I do know that there's something about mystical thinking that can protect against the problems we see in conspiratorial thinking. So for the Christian mystic, for example, they may believe that, in a whole bunch of doctrinal statements, but the content of that doctrine it feels to me is held a little lighter. Part of the problem with conspiratorial thinking is that it grasps after certainty. It tries to possess the truth about the world. And so, to me, a remedial strategy is to be okay with uncertainty and to practice it. It's like a muscle. Mm-hmm. And graduate school, as some of us here in person know, graduate school is great practice for that. It promotes a feeling of uncertainty that you can turn toward the good sometimes. And so as accustomed as one can become to the fact that we live in a mysterious world where we can know some things, we can find good news sources, we don't have to, obscure that point, but where there's a whole host of things that we can't know and don't know, or don't know yet. And so as mystical as we can be, the better, at least in response to a conspiracy theory that is promoting certainty. But I do say that with a caveat, too, that there are forms of mysticism that just mystify things, that take something that's clear and right before your eyes and says, oh, poof, everything is being, everything is oneness. And I want to avoid that, too. I don't think that that's the kind of remedial strategy that I'm talking about. There's a way to be a mystic without mystifying the clear things that are given.
Sounds like there's a healthy tension between kind of mystical or contemplative embrace of mystery and uncertainty with a kind of pursuit of truth and pursuit of knowing that can stand in a kind of uneasy tension with one another.
And we often hear from both poles of that tension. We'll hear from one side that says, like, oh, just treat the conspiracy theorist in your life compassionately and you're good. And that's all well and good until we get to some COVID conspiracy theories or vaccine conspiracy theories, and it can actually cause real risk to human life. So that's where compassion kind of fails, and we need to find more incisive approaches. But then there's the other pole where you get this kind of line that says, look, when you encounter a conspiracy theory, fact check it and debunk it right away. Go hard on that, on the kind of facts line. And that, sometimes that's very important, but sometimes that doesn't work. And so I'm looking for, and I'm sure a lot of people are looking for, other ways than simply just embracing the conspiracy theorists around us and or becoming antagonistic and just going against them. Better to see the ways that we all embrace certain conspiratorial beliefs, even if it's just a sense of like everything happens for a reason. Better to turn that compassion inward and outward at the same time.
So I'm cognizant of time, and you've been really generous. I'm going to now move into a Q&A.
Great.
And I just want to start with one of the online questions.
Uh-oh.
And I'll have to give a shout out to my friend Dominic, who must be watching from Delaware, because the first question is from a good friend of mine. So Dominic asks, since a lot of conspiracy theories seem to have a racial or bigoted element, is there an element of insecurity in those who are historically in power, possibly losing their power that might birth these conspiracies?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I definitely see the major connection that the question posits, and the great example of that one is in these COVID and pandemic conspiracy theories, where because of the Wuhan location of its origin, you get a racist term like the China virus. I mean, there's these examples all over the place of how conspiracy theories are racialized and promote a racialized view of the world. But as for a cause, I think that's a fascinating suggestion. I wouldn't have enough evidence right now, and I'm not sure if that work's been done. But there is a feeling of when a dominant individual or group starts feeling like they're losing grip on power. And I think that's commensurate with this problem of uncertainty, that when those in political power start losing it, like this white supremacy problem, then yeah, I mean, conspiracy theories are usable. They're political. They can often be used as political tools. As we're seeing in the US this week, where there are conspiracy theories about the Omicron variant being some kind of constructed thing, which is false. But you can see how this conspiratorial narrative gets used for political ends.
Yeah, the point that Dominic made after the question is on this point of power, and power is something that is kind of underlying, the question of politics and conspiracy thinking, where conspiracy theories can get wielded to achieve some sort of political power over a rival.
Yeah, it's all shot through with power, in that a conspiracy theory can be used by a political group, for their aims, or the accusation that you're a conspiracy theorist. That's also a tool of power. But the problem is, I appreciate, because I work in critical theory, I appreciate power analysis. I think that everything is, in a way, power-laden. We don't say a sentence or a word without some powerful assertion. However, there are limits to power thinking. Like if you think everything is an exercise in power, that can lead to an us versus them, friends versus enemies kind of black and white view of the world. And so some of the work that I do in Mennonite political theology, there are some thinkers there who are trying to push for more, for understanding power positively as shared power, right? The best kind of power is shared power, and how we share that is really what matters. And that fits with this problem of conspiratorial thinking as something that arises when public trust decays.
That's great.
That's a great question. Thank you, Dominic.
Very good question. It's nice to know some people back home are watching.
Yeah, that's great.
Are there any questions from the folks in the room tonight?
I think we have a portable mic you can send around too. Thanks everyone for coming out too.
Speaking to what you mentioned about public trust, one thing I've noticed consistently from the conspiracy theorists in my life is a fundamental mistrust in all of our institutions. All scientists are lying, all governments are lying, academia's a scam, so on and so forth. And then if you spend any amount of time talking to them about it, eventually they sort of give up that approach and just get sad. Because if their conspiracy theory is powerless, and so are all the institutions, then they just feel like there's no hope in the world, and they get very depressed. So what can we do to sort of restore some amount of faith in our institutions that, in their minds, have failed them for 40 years?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that diagnosis is exactly correct. Like, conspiracy theories arise when public trust decays, so COVID and pandemic-related conspiracy theories thrive off of the very real problems with the medical establishment. There are lots of people.
Often a kernel of truth, right? Because in some ways our institutions have failed
and
people.
It's hard because we want, like, I think a lot of people who I talk to want to go as hard as they can against conspiracy theories, and they end up missing some of the very real problems with institutions. So it's hard, you're right. Like I noticed the pattern that you mentioned as well, where you talk to someone who believes in a conspiracy theory and it's distrust, distrust, distrust. Institutions are bad, bad, bad. And some of the points that they make are correct and helpful, but the overall context is damaging. And so I think it's better to see institutions as same as people, having a dark and a light side, having good things and bad things, and being profoundly mixed. And so we shouldn't expect more from institutions than they can provide. I don't expect our government to be perfect. I don't even expect it to do a good job. But I also don't think that our government is, full of a cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles. So I think there are middle ways. There are ways to say, yeah, absolutely. There are these huge problems with the government, with the medical establishment, with the church, with whatever. However, I do hope that there will be that people, in our, I hesitate to use the word generation, but like people who are younger, I hope that suspicion of institutions can fade a bit. Because we do desperately need institutions to be trustworthy. And I think the answer is, and when you hit that sad point after which the conspiracy theorist has ejected some beliefs or kind of shuffled them away, that's the point where you can start to actually rebuild bonds of trust. You can say like, hey, yeah, that institution did fail you. The government did, misuse your tax dollars, or, when you went to the hospital that one time, yeah, you're right, they didn't treat you well. That doesn't mean that all hospitals, all governments, all whatever. Yeah.
It's interesting because there is also an attempt to appeal to credentialed authority, even as they're saying the institutions are corrupt. So the whole pandemic thing, the whole point was this credentialed medical doctor was speaking out for this conspiracy theory, and people would love to point to these credentialed authorities who are saying their belief while also saying the medical establishment is evil and corrupt.
And I think the lesson in that is that consistency is not a part of conspiratorial thinking. That if you go looking for consistency, if you go trying to fact check and keep consistent, that's never what it was about. And so occasionalist or reactive responses like that, they make sense because as long as that kind of fits your stable sense of what's going on, and you use it. But
any other
thanks
questions?
for your question. That was great.
Yeah,
very
great
helpful.
question.
And it put a finger on something that I've noticed as well. Which is this. Often conspiracy theories come with beliefs that are discardable, that will take you a certain way, and then it's a smokescreen, and we're talking about something else. And I find it very difficult to talk to some people who believe in conspiracy theories because it's impossible to trace a single line of thinking. And so, what do you do?
So we'll hear from Dina, and then we'll hear from Elizabeth after that.
You mentioned the role of social media in propagating conspiracy theories, and I'm just wondering if you have any hope for social media being able to work in the other direction, of being able to talk some reason or engage in discussions that might help the harm that can be done or the violence that can be done out of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. And I don't have an answer in a way that I'd make a proclamation, but I do think it's worth thinking really critically about which platforms we're talking about too. That there just seems to be something about a Facebook comment section that just leads down a bad road. That it's just very, very hard to have a meaningful, connecting, human engagement there. Twitter is a little different. It can become very toxic, and it can also do that, but there are also corners of Twitter that are quite positive. It depends on what kind of culture you're creating. And then I think about Instagram too. For a while, I think Instagram was far friendlier because it was about pictures. But there's also, memes. There are ways that text and image come together and can just cut against that. And so, I do think that it is more incumbent upon the owners of these platforms to regulate. It's their job, and they ought to be held accountable. It's not our job. It's not everyday people's job. That's another kind of neoliberal lie, that it's up to every individual person to do something that a large corporation could simply achieve if they weren't so committed to the kind of capitalist economy.
And there is just ways in which the technology is working against us,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Oh,
people
it's-
have talked about the ways in which the YouTube algorithm has led people down really extreme rabbit holes. They start searching for something anodyne, suggested video after suggested video after suggested video, and they're off in conspiracy land. And so there are ways in which the technology is not helping
Yeah,
us.
and I think that at the core of that comment is we must not see technology as neutral, right? A technology, whatever tool we're talking about, whether it's a physical tool like a pen or something virtual, these tools come with a way of use. They encourage certain kinds of use. They're not neutral. And so, yeah, the YouTube algorithm, I notice it, my wife and I will watch music videos, and we'll get in a circle where the recommended videos afterwards are the same bands, same old bands. We're just listening to the same old music until we get an external recommendation from someone, it's not in YouTube, it's like from a friend. And then once I search that and start listening to this new band, then the circle expands. Same with what you're seeing pop up on your Facebook feed and what you're seeing pop up on YouTube. Like the trick is to find ways that get outside of those closed loops that each platform promotes in its own way.
Yeah. Thanks, Dina. That's a great
Yeah,
question.
I think that is the question.
I'm wondering if you can make any observations about the role that either economic systems or economic conditions play in all this. As you've been speaking, I've been thinking, I was thinking about Germany in the 30s or Europe in the 30s and the Jewish conspiracy, and I was thinking about economic conditions today and the rise of vaccine conspiracies. But then I was thinking about the Princess Diana conspiracy and John Kennedy conspiracy, and so I'm just kind of wondering, is there a role that economic conditions play in this or not really?
Oh, definitely. I think that's an important connection where the people feel economic tension, especially when they feel scarcity. And that economic uncertainty feels like a key linchpin that I wonder, you thought experimented a bit, like if people's economic insecurity were fixed, solved with something like a universal basic income or something comparable, just imagine that. I think that people would be far less inclined to believe in conspiracy theories, especially the anti-Semitic ones. A large part of Germany in the 30s was this, the everyday German was, experiencing financial hardship and looking around for someone to blame. And then the National Socialist story about the Jewish people comes up, and suddenly the economic problems that are real get transposed onto a scapegoat.
And it's not just being low income. You talked about uncertainty. And when uncertainty gets mixed with precarity, I mean, that's a recipe for a disaster, right? When your own life feels precarious, and then you're grappling with this kind of existential uncertainty, I mean, that is... Yeah.
And I think that one intervention there, I mean, we definitely need larger economic intervention. I think about the housing market in southwestern Ontario. I think about all these things. We need larger economic interventions, but on the ground, one way to tackle this is to deal with that kind of low-level hum of economic precarity or uncertainty that a lot of people experience. Even people who are fairly comfortable in middle class, still experience this kind of financial stress. And so there are strategies, almost therapeutic strategies, to try to work with those anxieties that then can kind of get ahead of some of the motivations for believing in conspiracy theories. Thank you for your question. I think that's...
Thanks, Elizabeth. Any final questions?
You're being signaled for your phone.
Yeah. Yeah, so Dom asks again about the phrase, "Make America Great Again," and whether there's a kind of conspiratorial element to even that phrase.
I think that my first thought about Make America Great Again is actually connected to Joe Biden's Build Back Better. And I observe that although they are extremely different, wildly different, both Biden's Build Back Better and Trump's Make America Great Again, the persuasiveness of these phrases rests on what they do with time. That for Trump, in that statement, there's posited a time when America was great. And I think if anyone knows American history, then they know that maybe that's not true. But it's the invocation of a golden age, like a past that phrase reaches back and brings it to the present. Same with Build Back Better, right? Back, the temporal, hearkening back. And so, my mind is on time, but I think that the observation that Make America Great Again is, given to conspiratorial thinking. I think that only if you mix it with, and only if the implication is the reason why America isn't great now is because of these bad groups. I think that MAGA is politically usable in tandem with the kind of racist discourse that you get around it. So yeah, yes.
I also wonder if there's something to say about conspiracy theories and community. I know that QAnon can, for many people, be a sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of shared participation in a project. So is there anything about kind of the social isolation that many people are experiencing in this connection to communities of thought and practice?
Yeah, I think certain conspiracy theories are, I think that people who are isolated are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories, which is interesting because when you believe in a conspiracy theory, you are joining a community. You're partaking in something and engaging in a project with others, which is often virtual, it's often online. So I think what really matters is the character of those social bonds. Is that within the conspiracy theory community, that's community, it is. But then it's another question, is it a good community? Are people connecting in meaningful ways? And so I think the real question underneath it is how do you connect with others? There are ways that conspiracy theorists signal to each other that they're on the same page and they can kind of connect in that way. And religious people do that too, right? There are very Christian or other forms of religious connection where you find out, we're speaking the same language, or we have the same shared history or the same tradition. Conspiratorial thinking is a tradition, and it has religious resonances. And so the question is not, I don't think the question is so much whether conspiracy theories are, come from isolation or lead to isolation. It's what are the character differences between the conspiracy theory community and other forms of community that are maybe more protected against it.
Well, Max, I'm going to have to cut myself off because we've been having this conversation for years and we'll continue to have it. You've been incredibly generous with your time. Thank you for those of you who came out to see us in person, braving a bit of snow. And thank you to the online community who are watching. So let's just give Max a round of applause. For those of you who are here or watching at home, we'll be doing another one of these on January 12th at 7 o'clock. Another very timely conversation around housing and houselessness. So for those of you who are living in Southern Ontario, you will know that this is a very pressing and urgent conversation for us. So we'll be having some experts, some practitioners who will be coming to talk with us about their work in Hamilton and beyond. So feel free to join us for that one as well. Thanks, Max.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.